I saw a great big tourist bus of folks from out of town. For 40 days and 40 nights, they covered.
Welcome to Stony Point Center. I'm Marilyn Elie, and I have here with me Susan Leifer and Jeanne Shaw. We just finished a meeting, a really interesting and important meeting. It's the Indian Point Convergence. We meet every Sunday, the first Sunday of every month, and all are welcome, really. But the people around this table are those who really know a lot and really follow very carefully Indian Point, what happens there, and right now, the closing agreement. It's historic, it's changed everything. So, Jeanne, you had some concerns about the closing agreement. You want to start out by saying something about it?
Sure. One of the things that I've thought about is the fact that there are politicians who are worried about the need to redevelop the land that Indian Point is on, and that's a really bad thing because that's not going to happen anytime soon. So I think it's really important to make that understood, and it's not like...
Why it's important.
Yeah.
Right, well, it's important because it's going to be a large amount of contaminated area, contaminated equipment, contaminated soil and groundwater, and there's no way of knowing yet what the extent of that is. And until you know the extent of that, then you don't know how long it'll take to clean up, or even if it's possible to actually clean it up. And of course, nobody wants that area to go to waste, but let's face it, it's nuclear. And what lays waste to things better than nuclear? So I think that that's one of those difficult realities that people are going to have to learn to deal with and stop worrying about how to reuse it, but how to actually safely decommission it and get rid of it and keep it safe forever.
Right.
Because that's really what has to happen. And if it's possible to use for anything else, that's great, but that is so far down the line that is probably not in any of our lifetimes even.
That's probably true.
So,
Okay. No, that's a good start on that. Susan, you had some thoughts about that. I would add that we have 2,300 tons of high-level radioactive waste sitting around right now in the spent fuel pools at Indian Point, which is more than they had in all of Fukushima. By the time the plant closes in 2020 and 2021, there will be even more of that radioactive waste. So it has to come out of the pool, it has to go in dry cask storage, and somebody needs to do some math along the way to see how much room that's going to take up on that property. It's just not feasible to start talking about ratables and restoring and all of that until we get a better handle on decommissioning. And by the way, the company has 60 years to really decommission that place. Susan, you wanted to add something?
Sure. I guess I was really excited for a very short time about closing Indian Point. I'm still excited about closing it. I'm overwhelmed with the amount of things that has to happen to make this a safe journey. The decommissioning, the plant itself has to be handled well. The amount of fuel that is stored, the high-level fuel and regular fuel. We're sitting on several Fukushimas, and it'll still be dangerous. And I think learning about that is going to be a whole new part of our commitment.
Yeah, I think so too. People right now, particularly those in Buchanan and other people who are employed at the plant, are really, I think, hurt and bewildered and taken aback. We've talked about Indian Point closing for a very long time, but they never really expected it to happen. And now that it's happened, because Entergy, the owner of the plant, has said, goodbye, we're not making enough money, and they're the only ones that really could close the plant down and move out, decided to do exactly that. They felt like they owed that to their stockholders for stability purposes. That was what the CEO of Entergy said. So what do you do about the workers? Well, there are three things primarily in the closing agreement. One of them is for older workers that they might retire. The second one is for retraining. The state of New York, NYSERDA, is offering training in a lot of solar and wind technologies, and relocate. The state of New York has guaranteed, I can't say guaranteed, what they've done is they've offered to place workers in power plants in upstate New York and around as they can in these different power plants when positions are available. Entergy has also offered to make available positions as they can in their other utilities. All of that, of course, would mean relocating. It means disruption to the community, and it means that somebody's going to come up with the short end of a stick. And that's what happens every time a big business closes, a big industry in a small town. Ratables are the chief concerns for taxes, for schools, and for police, and it's going to be very difficult. There is state money available to help communities that are impacted by power plants that close, but when you talk to the people involved, you will find that they feel that it is never enough. I guess one of the things I would say...
Yes, we've been talking about a smart transition.
Yeah, that's good. Yes, and I'd like for you to do that. But I guess one of the other things I would say is that you have to weigh the economic interests of the people that are benefiting from the town against the lives of 20 million people who are at risk because of Indian Point. You want to talk about a smart transition?
Well, I think we're all thinking about a smart transition, and one of the things which will happen is if there's going to be a decommissioning done well, you need to keep the workers who are most knowledgeable about the plant. The plant has specs, but the plant is not actually exactly what the specs say, and you need people who are really knowledgeable, not people that you pull in, but you need the people who understand this plant and know what its kinks are, who know what the vulnerabilities are, who know what doesn't work and what works, and how sturdy some things are. You need those people to be the decommissioners. The thought was floated out that, well, we can decommission to another corporation and they'll do it. But they don't understand the problems and they don't understand the process. And this is a much too dangerous plant to not do it well.
Yeah, it certainly is. Okay. Well, we also spent time this afternoon talking about Fukushima. The 6th anniversary of that ongoing nuclear disaster is coming up, and we will be introducing to our community an expert called Dr. Gordon Edwards. And what I would suggest to people who are our listeners is that they Google Dr. Edwards, or they go to our website, which is you could find very easily with www.ipsecinfo.com or .org, either one, and you'll see information about his credentials. He's highly respected, highly known, and he's talking about something in regard to waste, particularly called rolling stewardship. Jeanne, have you, I know you haven't had much time to look at that, but did something come up?
Some of it. I thought it was, when I went to his website and I Googled him, and I went all over the place looking at him, it would be easy to get overwhelmed, but it was so interesting that I didn't feel overwhelmed. But I couldn't really quote you stuff out of it. But I could. But I have recommended to people after looking at that to not only come to our program, because getting to see him and to hear what he has to say and to be able to ask him questions is just such an amazing opportunity for anyone who has the least bit of concern about this issue, which anyone around should. But also, I've recommended to people to look him up and read his stuff. Take your time so you won't be overwhelmed, but just leave it there and go to it periodically and read another paper, read another interview. And it's very, very eye-opening, and it really reminds you of how not simple this whole thing is. And when you're closing a nuclear plant, it's not going to be quick, it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be that pretty either. So it's not suddenly we're going to have no domes sitting there. That those domes are going to be there for quite some time. We're not suddenly going to have no more danger. The danger is going to be there for quite some time. We're still going to have spent fuel on site. And it doesn't make sense to put a whole lot of any form of energy into trying to talk about changing that, because that's not going to change. What has to change is our whole attitude on the reality of nuclear power. And right now, we all need to understand that the reality of decommissioning is don't hold your breath. It's going to take a long time,
Yeah.
and that's unavoidable.
It's unavoidable, and it's heavy industrial work with an added layer of concern because of the radioactivity involved. And the NRC is not responsible for decontaminating or supervising the decommissioning of every site or of every building on the site. They're only responsible for the ones that are radioactive. So there are a lot of other things on that plant, site, that will need work, like the radioactive pool of water underneath the whole base, water that eventually tritium-laced water and other radionuclides as well, that leaked from spent fuel pool unit 1 and is now draining into the Hudson. How is that going to be remediated? How long will it take? Those are unknown questions.
Right.
So nobody's going to be building condos on that anytime soon.
Definitely not.
No. That's the connection, I think, between Fukushima and Indian Point. That's stored waste. They can't deal with it with the spent fuel. They can't store the waste at Fukushima. They're still struggling with that, and storing it at Indian Point is one of the things that Dr. Edwards will teach us more about with his concept of rolling stewardship. That involves getting the fuel out of the pool, putting it in dry cask, and having it monitored for the 240,000 years
Yes.
that,
Yes, I
it's,
think that's
that it's
important.
lethal. Yeah.
I
Susan?
think it's very important, because I think it's an enormous task. And the casks that they're putting the nuclear fuel in only last, hopefully, 70 years. It's going to have to be recast and recast and recast. We're talking about 240,000 years. And we don't even know how to take out a cast fails, and we do not know how to take out the nuclear material safely and put it into another cask. So that's a whole learning process that's involved. It's Marilyn said, it's a very, very complicated process, and we need to know that it's being done well. And part of the closing involves Entergy, and it involves Riverkeeper. But we really feel that there should be a robust citizens group, knowledgeable citizens group that looks this over. Because failure in any of these dimensions is going to cost us a lot of health, wealth, and it's going to be a tragedy if it's not done well.
Well, there is a task force being formed, both by the governor and, as I understand it, also by County Executive Linda, by Cortland Supervisor Linda Puglisi. Terrence Murphy is on it. I don't know that our county executive is on it, but there are people on the county level task force that are from communities that are mostly affected by the closing. However, I was very struck by the people on both task forces being very political and, frankly, not being very knowledgeable about the situation. There are those of us who have been looking at this situation for a very long time, and I think could offer a lot of very good advice, scientific-based, with citing our sources and everything else, that could really have an important impact and save everybody a lot of time. So we are calling for active citizen involvement on these task force. It has to be more than our elected officials, who are, many of them, just still in shock over the loss of tax revenue.
Sally wants to add
Okay,
something.
Sally, what did you want to say?
Two groups.
Just, you can say where you
Okay,
are.
yeah. Two groups who were in on the agreement, Riverkeeper and Clearwater, should certainly be on that task force. They were part of the agreement. How are they not in there?
That's a good idea. That's a great question. And I think that the governor and Supervisor Puglisi should take our good advice and put those two people on at the very least. Right. Sally, I would point out, is the person who takes our minutes and sends out our agenda and does a lot of our web work. So thank you for that good detail, Sally. Well, we also did a lot of work on our website. Sally's on the website committee, as I am, and several others in the coalition are. And I really encourage you to visit our new website. It looks terrific, and you can find it at Indian Point Info. And take a look at the top part. Right now it's about our program, but that will go away soon. And the rotating part at the top of the homepage says all of the issues that we think are the most critical importance, and it rotates, and you can get details by clicking on any of that. You'll also see a timeline that is probably the best anywhere. Because we've searched and searched and searched.
That's a really important thing.
Yeah.
I think that's a real asset to have.
That timeline is. And you can click on the timeline, and it will take you right to our blog, where are the articles that were posted around that time. What'd you think about the timeline when you saw, or the website when you saw it today, Jeanne? Any special thoughts?
No, not really any special thoughts, but I did think the timeline was really good and really helpful, because often you wonder, when did we do this, when did we do that? So it's nice to see the timeline as a reminder of just how long we've been doing this stuff, and like, wow, okay, there we are.
Does the timeline include all the disasters that happened to?
I think every one of them.
That would be very interesting to
Yeah.
see. Yeah, because there are people who say, well, it's got to be safe. The government says it's safe. And we've been hitting our heads against the wall because it's not true.
It's not true. It's not true. It's also right up there with that same myth. It's not true that those two reactors generate 25% of our electricity. I even noticed a change in the wording for the Times now. They used to say 25% of the electricity from Indian Point was used in New York City. They're not exactly saying that now. So many task force and reports have come out that they're now saying it's like the equivalent of, or it's as much electricity as would be used in 25% of the total in New York. It was a slight change, but I think highly significant. And I know that the governor is saying that we don't need any more, well, he's not saying we don't need any more electricity. He'd like to build the Champlain-Hudson line. But the PSC, the Public Service Commission, is saying that we can do without Indian Point and make do with, guess what?
Conservation. Conservation. And it's really interesting that we are using less electricity than we've ever used before. And partly it's because of a smart thing that Con Ed is doing, and that it's the electricity that you use for your peak is as expensive as the electricity that you use just everyday electricity. And they have been able to knock down the peak and change the angle of it so that it's not as steep, by making commitments with corporations. If we call you in 24 hours or we call you in 2 hours, that you will take down some of your electricity, whether you will put down half your fluorescence lights or maybe you will stop some machinery. And that is going to make an enormous difference. And what's very interesting about it is you can't just say, I'm going to do it. They will inspect and make sure that you know how to do it. And they will pay you what that electricity would cost you if you ran it. And I think it's a very clever way of getting the community and getting business in on this. We all stand to gain by it. Mm-hmm. And I guess somebody can talk about the transmission, because a lot of electricity is lost in transmission. And they have a new transmission line that is going to save us 300 megabytes of megawatts. Thank you, megawatts of energy, and that goes a long way to replacing Indian Point.
The Bureau of Ocean Management came out with a report that listed the replacement electricity generators that are online now, and it also listed all of the electricity that we can save by conservation, also efficiency, and cutting down on demand, managing demand side supply. We have a surplus of electricity. People find that hard to believe. Did you want to add something to that, Jeanne?
No.
Yeah, okay. So when people tell you we need more and more electricity, they don't know what they're talking about. They should go read some studies.
Yes, they should.
From the Independent System Operator, from the Bureau of Ocean Management, from Riverkeeper. You can find some of those studies on the Clearwater website. We have plenty of electricity, and in fact, Indian Point has already been replaced. One of the last things we talked about at our meeting was Article 78. We were very active with this one. It was called Tier 3, which was the I don't know, I guess we could call it the subsidy to the upstate nuclear reactors that Governor Cuomo threw into the clean energy standard. So now, I know you wanted to say something about that, about tier, because, I will finish my thought here.
Please do.
Yeah. Tier 3 was adopted by the Public Service Commission, and now they are being taken to court through a procedure called Article 78. And do you want to say something about that, Jeanne?
Only about the fact that it's so inherently unfair for Governor Cuomo to want to keep open nuclear plants upstate so that he looks better politically, but the plant owners have no desire to keep them open, and we don't need them to be kept open. It just adds more danger and more bad pile up of poisons and toxins on our Great Lakes, and then we have to pay extra in order to do that. So we who don't even, down here, we don't even get any power from them. Not that that would make a difference to me, but we don't. We get absolutely nothing from them. But we would all be expected to chip in to pay to keep them alive
On our electricity
on
bill.
our electricity bill, when everyone used to talk about, well, if we close Indian Point, then our electricity bills are going to go up. Well, long before it came out that Indian Point would close, our electricity bills were going to go up, and we were going to keep Indian Point open. So that's crazy. And now, without Indian Point, it's not that's going to make our electricity bills go up. It's going to be keeping the upstate plants open that will keep our electricity bills going up. That's nuts.
Yeah.
Susan?
So I joined this Article 78 as an individual consumer. I'm already using 100% renewable energy. So I will be then charged with additional money to keep the upstate nuclear, even though I have already switched to 100% renewable energy. And I think that's where the Article 78 comes from. The Article 78 was started by a lawyer, Susan Hito Shapiro, who has an organic farm that is completely fueled by renewables. And that farm would have to pay extra money, maybe a sizable amount, to keep the upstate nuclear going. And it's just crazy. And so that's where the Article 78 comes in.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've
No,
worked
we're
hard
saying-
to get some progress. It's taken a long time and a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And I think we fought very hard. And we want to see it done well. We don't want to see it just stopped. We want to see it decommissioned safely. We want the spent fuel to be taken care of properly. We want to know how we're going to communicate with people 10,000 years from now so they know that it's not safe and they protect themselves. And we're talking about 240,000 years, so that's a long, long time and a lot of communication to keep something like this going. I don't think anybody who decided to make this as a form of energy had any idea what the problems would be afterwards. It just wouldn't go away when they stopped.
I think you're right. So thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for the next program and the next update from the Indian Point Convergence. Thank you.
I saw a great big tourist bus of folks from out of town. For 40 days and 40 nights, they covered miles of ground. They had a map and compass, but they still were not arriving. Oh, they couldn't get to Pleasantville, so they kept on driving. And then one day the sirens blew, the county was aghast. It seems the aging nuke plant had an accident at last. The stockholders who fainted couldn't be reached for reviving, and they couldn't get to Pleasantville 'cause there was